doing, man?
I'm well, Lewis. How are you?
I'm very well, and I'm especially well today because we are joined by a special guest. Hi, Ghan. How you doing?
Hey, pleasure to talk to you guys.
It's
Yeah,
a
you
pleasure to have you
too.
here.
Definitely. Ghan is the co-creator of an amazing podcast called the Spacetime Diaries, and I'm right in saying it's an anthology series. So the first season is called the Disappearing. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It's I when I was making it, I wasn't thinking podcast. I was just thinking like an audio drama or cinema or and but it just didn't seem right to post it on like say Spotify as like a music album because if you listen to one episode in a playlist for like I just didn't think that the Spotify robots that churn songs would know what to do with it. So it's a podcast, and I'm seeing more of these sort of narrative single, it's like a set of like a mini series almost.
Yeah.
Of narrative musical. I've seen some musical narrative stuff too, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean, we absolutely adore anything even vaguely related to audio drama. Myself, especially, I always bring it up on the podcast and mention, oh yeah, there's this obscure new podcast I'm listening to. What do you think? And Danny always says, sorry, what podcast?
Definitely.
So I've got a couple of questions for you, if that's all right.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Danny, you want to get started?
Yeah, definitely. So for those that don't know what the Spacetime Diaries are, could you explain the premise and the sort of nature of the story?
Yeah, it's so Spacetime Diaries. It is the name of the podcast series, and it's loosely a collection of stories that are science fiction in nature and musical in nature. And as the idea has been sort of developing, I think I want it all to be stories from a single fictional timeline. And the first season is called The Disappearing, and that's a story about a woman from our time. She lives in the San Francisco Bay Area. She works in Silicon Valley tech as some faceless engineering peon, and there's a wild pandemic happening, roughly around the time of today. People are just disappearing. They're just blipping out of existence. Their clothes fall limp to the ground. And it's this sudden, very scary thing. And epidemiologists have figured out that it looks like it's contagious because it's sort of like spreading like a contagious thing. So they don't know what to make of it. It happens to the main character, and she's transported into the distant future, onto a distant planet. And the sort of setting, the backdrop of the story is the long arc of humanity is a series of close calls with peril or demise. We barely escape climate change and the climate apocalypse. We kind of wreck Earth, but we barely escape to two other planets that we had discovered at that point. Few hundred years down the road, we discover a couple planets that look like they would work for habitation. And then we figure out a way of traveling to them using a manipulation of the space-time fields, basically gravity manipulation to be able to move at near speed of light or maybe even faster than the speed of light. So that's like those are the things that happened that led to this planet being colonized by humans, and then as the story progresses. You learn that there's a clash of cultures happening on this planet. And in fact, those two planets that we colonized, one of those planets, whoopsie, we, wrecked the ecology there too. And so they had to escape from that planet. And so there's only one planet that humanity is left on, and that's this planet called Ankara. And the colonists who had originally got there first, during the Earth collapse, they met a super intelligent fungus that lives on the planet. It's a sort of like super conscious pan consciousness. It's sort of it connects all living things on the planet and sort of maintains an equilibrium status. And when when humans showed up, they quickly had to reckon with this, species, and learn to live symbiotically with it. And they had to, humans had to give up part of their agency, or their, their sort of right to do whatever they pleased. They had to give some of that up for the sake of maintaining the equilibrium. So, it's kind of, the story is kind of about the question of whether humans are fated to just consume, destroy, manipulate for their own means. Is that sort of like, is that like hardwired in, and is it something that we could ever overcome? Is the idea of just like being satisfied with just enough, is that in our DNA at all?
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah.
World building is
every single thing you said, I was like, it ticks another box. as I go down my list, it's like, okay, the story has ecological themes. There's a sentient fungus. There's travel. Just going down the list, like, yes.
Yeah, man, it's sci-fi. You might as well, go big. And another thing that I discuss in one of the themes is sort of deep fakes, and how can we govern ourselves if we can't trust what we see and hear? Like, one of the things that happens in the story is that on Ankara, it's the distant future. It's a clash of two cultures. The culture that sort of, let's say the hippie culture that sort of like learned to live with the fungus was there already. And then a new culture, which is kind of like, Silicon Valley culture. They wrecked their other planet, and now they're coming here to colonize this planet. And with them, they brought all their new technology. And one of the things they do is they can deep fake things in real life, that you can see and touch and feel, and it's a hologram, but it's a very realistic hologram, and
sort of like the entire world is like one of the Star Trek holodecks.
Yeah, and so you really don't know for sure, what something is or something isn't. But in the same way that audio and video deepfakes, photograph deepfakes are around. It's common. We can create them with what we have on our computers right now. Like the technology. Yet what we see and we hear, we don't question, every time we see or hear something online. We just assume, and unless someone was to tell us it's a deep fake, we're like, oh yeah, oh, I see that now, but so I don't think that's
another tick on the list. Is like, is technology, will technology defeat us?
Right.
Just keep ticking on these things on the list. I'm really here for it.
Yeah, so great. So I think anyone who sort of had their eyes and ears open last year and saw, on the West Coast where I live, we saw some pretty gnarly wildfires. And in America, the political thing was pretty bananas last year. And I apologize for, the 300 million people who live here on behalf of them. To anyone who lives outside of the country and the annoying amount of coverage you may or may not have received about that terrible year of politics. But, I live in Portland, Oregon, and we have an interesting sort of political dynamic. In the city itself is incredibly progressive and liberal and sort of on the left. And then the rural area outside becomes very quickly conservative and pretty white nationalist. And Oregon has some history of being a sort of like not allowing people who weren't white to move to the state, and those laws are less than 100 years old. I think they were taken off the books in like 1930 or something like that.
Goodness me.
Yes,
it's crazy to look at, as you describe, about sort of urban density being more left leaning in politics. That was the amazing thing I think that I noticed during, as you say, the 2020 election was the bits of the US map that were blue and the bits that were red. It was basically the denser a population center is, the more likely it is to turn blue, as it were.
During 2020, there were things that were happening in Portland, like there was a big truck rally that paraded down Grand Avenue, which is through the middle of the city, and I got caught in it, and it was a demonstration of intimidation of the people of the country, the Trump supporters from the countryside coming into liberal Portland and sort of making a big stink. And the day after I wrote that into the podcast, I wrote that into episode 3.
Wow.
So in episode 3, Karima is traveling, she like leaves the village and she's like, okay, screw this, I just want to get home. And as she's going through the village, she sees this big truck rally come by, and they're chanting and they have signs, and they pull over and they stop to harass an elderly Ankara couple, people of the hippie culture. And it was a way to process what I saw. And, in the moment, in that week, I was like, what, I just recently moved to Portland from New York City. And I was like, where the fuck am I? Like, what is going on here? Like, is this, like, am I, and being a brown person, I was just like, should I be worried? And being able to put it into the podcast and put it into the story and kind of create sort of like a caricature of it. It just was a way of, it was just really fun and satisfying to do that, to kind of have the last laugh or something.
Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, that is, you spoke there about sort of what drove you to write sort of certain events into the podcast. What about sort of right back at the start, when you first came up with the idea, what sort of motivated you to get started? And did you always want it to be like a sort of a collaborative process, or was it ever just a you on your own type thing?
Yeah, well, it's really funny. I didn't have like a really strong vision. It started at the beginning of the pandemic in March, and I started by telling myself, okay, this is a great opportunity to really hone my skills as a musician and as a producer and a songwriter. So all you have to do is produce a song once a week and upload it to your SoundCloud. And it doesn't have to be good, but you just have to do something to get over your self-censorship. And so, I was before this, I would like remix things or sort of hobby poke around in music production. And week by week, as the pandemic progressed and as the pandemic got longer, every week I would maintain this practice. About May or June, I started, and it was really just an organic thing where the things I would upload would just get more narrative. It started with just like a minute of a narration before jumping into a cover of a Billie Holiday song, and then it eventually got to this story, this 4-part story, and it just became a 4-part story because I decided to make a sequel for the next 3 weeks. And so that at the end it was this 4-part story called Cordyceps, and it was about a mushroom only this mushroom is a pandemic. This mushroom has evolved from, targeting ants, right?
Yeah, that's the way it makes ants jump off trees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Yeah. So I was like, what if that happened, just evolved to attack humans? And so Cordyceps is this 4-part thing and again, it was just not intentional at all. It was just like, oh, I guess I just made this thing. And I shared it with some friends, and they were like, oh, this is cool. You should, develop this kind of concept. It's kind of like a musical, but it's kind of like a rock opera,
Yeah.
And so I was working a contract that ended in August, and I was kicking around an idea where there are these 2 women who are partnered, and in their dreams they see this fictional world, and then one disappears mysteriously, and the other one continues to see the fictional world, but she sees her partner in it, and it turns out that she had sort of been like transported to this other dimension, and that was kind of like where the idea started for the disappearing.
Sure.
But as I was developing it, and when I lost the contract, I was like, okay, I'm gonna take a couple months off work and just live really cheaply. All I was spending on was groceries anyway. So, and really kind of make this big. And I eventually started researching 8 sequence structures and 3-act plays and how to craft the story, so that the story was compelling. I felt Cordyceps was interesting, but I just felt it wasn't a very good, it wasn't an exciting story. It was just like things that happened in a row, because of the way I created it. So then I, would research stories, and as I would talk to friends about it, my friends in New York, or in LA, and they were like, "Oh, cool! Can I play a character?" And so it just snowballed into this massive production that took 3.5 months and coordinated 14 people. I had people contribute music, like a bass track or a drum track. I had people, contribute their dialogue parts. I had friends sing in it, and it was, I have a whole Google Drive, folder. It's like folders upon folders and like files and documents and spreadsheets and stuff just to track, putting it together. And then I had,
That's incredible.
Yeah, and at the end of it, in December, I had my friend in LA. I hired him to mix and master it, because it's really a game changer to have a professional mix something like that. Because you listen to any moment of that podcast, there could be narration, dialogue, music, there's just so much going on, that I didn't want somebody listening on their phone or something to, be like, I can't hear it's just like a cacophony. So yeah, that's the story of its production. And I really didn't expect to make it into like a multi-season thing, but in December when I was sitting on like the mixing and mastering phase, I thought to myself, like, boy, this could be bigger. This could, I could make this into like a multi-season thing. And now I'm thinking it's beyond podcasts. I'm thinking of making like a season of Spacetime Diaries, or a story. One of the stories live as a TikTok miniseries, and you'd visit the page, or maybe you come across one of the episodes, and then you eventually get to this set of like 8 or 10 TikToks, and they sort of. Do you remember R. Kelly's Trapped in the Closet? I know R. Kelly is a little bit of a problematic figure to talk about, but Trapped in the Closet was this. It was a series of music videos that were just like episodic in nature, about him at his like lover's house, and he has to like hide in a closet, and he tries to sneak away, and it's it's like each episode of this music video series like ends in a cliffhanger, and just kind of runs together. Something like that, on TikTok is the latest idea. And
that's a really good idea.
I will, I think, do another podcast season. I think this podcast will continue to live, and the next thing I want to do is a series of meditations. So imagine it's a guided meditation, and you are the meditation puts you in the body of one of the alien creatures on this fictional planet of Ankara, and you're moving around, and it's sort of like like you see this over here. It's just like this little sort of like guided story of you embodying living on this alien planet. So I think I'm going to do that in the next couple months, and then a big story like The Disappearing next year. And it'll be a prequel. It'll be sort of the story of the villain. It'll be like the villain's origin story. The villain is the CEO of the corporation of the new colonizing culture.
That sounds like I'm already excited for that. Sort of science fiction is like you always sort of get different ideas from like different sort of science fiction that's came before. What specific pieces of sci-fi did you draw inspiration from, if any?
Yeah, it was less drawing from sci-fi, although I feel like sci-fi is like the default. Like when even like 10 or 15 years ago, sci-fi was this like niche genre of film, but it seems to be the default now. Like almost the way hip hop became pop music, like sci-fi. There's maybe it's just my Netflix recommendation feed, but like it seems like there's so much sci-fi now. There's like Black Mirror as a show kind of opened up and popularized this sort of like near future sci-fi. Deus. Did you guys see Deus or Devs? I guess It was this series.
No.
Uh,
I think I heard about it. I'm not sure if I actually saw it.
oh, it's fabulous. There's Raised by Wolves, which I think is on HBO. There's just gobs and gobs of sci-fi. There's like even things like Tenet. I would put into sort of like a sci-fi kind of genre.
Yeah.
But what I was drawing a lot of inspiration from was like old mythologies and like Tolkien. Maybe Star Wars to a certain degree, because Star Wars fits that sort of like hero's journey, sort of like Joseph Campbell sort of like model of you have the hero and they're thrown into this sort of other world, and by the skin of their teeth they overcome and grow personally and develop, transform.
It's almost like a mythology for like America specifically. It's very flashy, very sort of big, and but it still has that sort of classic sort of fable themed throughout it.
Yeah. I think I wanted it to feel very like vibrant and colorful. It's interesting you say American. I guess that's true.
Yeah, because Tolkien's like I think I read somewhere that Tolkien's aim for like creating sort of Middle Earth was like everywhere else had this fantastical sort of mythology, and England sort of didn't, and he wanted to sort of try and do something like that.
Yeah, yeah. I would say that George Lucas did for America what Tolkien did for England.
Absolutely, yeah.
Just how ubiquitous, like every single American knows about Darth Vader. It doesn't matter, if you've seen the movies or not. Like everyone knows the frickin' story, and it's just the longer it lives, the bigger it gets. Like there's now the Mandalorian, and they just keep like growing and developing this universe.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think maybe in like an indirect way, it's influenced by that. Certainly in like how Star Wars is like, just like you say, like very vibrant and loud and colorful and sort of like big in a very American way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's we've been doing a lot of talking about Star Wars recently. We just recently watched all 3 trilogies, sort of quite.
Oh wow!
For our podcast.
What did you think? What were the big takeaways?
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, it sort of became a bit like a fever dream of lots of bright colours and screaming after a few. But I think there is an argument to be made, sort of similar to what you were saying, that Star Wars, because it's so different to what we see around us, Star Wars is essentially a fantasy story. The fact that it happens in space with spaceships is kind of irrelevant. If you replace space with some made-up place and you replace the spaceships with dragons, it would work as a fantasy story that fits in the stereotypes.
It's more of a space adventure than it is a science fiction story.
Yeah, and it doesn't so much draw from like sort of events that were sort of current at the time or any of that sort of stuff.
Right.
You were saying that a lot of your work on Spacetime Diaries is informed.
Yeah, I think
by sort of current events and stuff.
That is a difference. I think that when I was making the story, I really wanted the science fiction part to be functional. Like I wanted the science to feel like plausible. Like manipulating gravity fields to get it. So there are 2 bits of science fiction in The Disappearing. One is that they equip nanobots with the ability to manipulate space-time. So, provided the assumption that we have the ability to manipulate space-time with like gravity pumps or some kind of like gravity manipulation, and we already have nanobots, if we put the 2 together, these nanobots could be self-replicating, and then now you have a contagion. Now you have some, like a virus that can manipulate space-time, and so that's what creates the sort of initial sort of the disappearing part of The Disappearing, and then the second and then the second bit of science fiction was the deep faking in the real world, and that I think is not a big leap of imagination at all. We have holographic technology and we have deepfake technology in video, So, I'm sure in the next 100 years there might be something like that going on.
Yeah, if those
Definitely.
three things all exist near each other for long enough, you'll sort of get there eventually.
Yeah.
No, I think I understand what you're saying about trying to make the science real. It's sort of the skill of a lot of the best science fiction is that like in Jurassic Park, at no point do you question, how did they make these dinosaurs?
Right.
Because they explain it with some obscure science mumbo.
Yeah, but just enough.
That sounds true enough.
Yeah,
Yep.
just enough to like okay, sure, yeah.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. Obviously, we've established that Spacetime Diaries sort of revolves around the story of this pandemic that's occurring. And obviously, I don't know if you'll have noticed this, but we are in a pandemic in real life.
Yeah, indeed, yeah.
How many of the sort of real life things would you say carry sort of a very direct correlation from sort of real life to the stories that take place in Spacetime?
Right.
Diaries?
Well, definitely the truck scene, like I mentioned, the sort of political stuff is directly pulled from how we're grappling with post-truth, and the two cultures on the planet live in they have two completely different truths. There's this event that happens that I allude to in the story called Drone Hollow. It's an incident where, and I don't ever really explain what happens. I just kind of hint at the way the two sides are seeing the same thing. The way that the culture, the Silicon Valley culture sees it, it was a terrorist attack by the hippie culture on a mining operation sort of on the outskirts of, sort of the colony. And the way the hippies see it is that they were just peacefully demonstrating, and then, there was a deep fake, suddenly there was these images appearing of them doing these things, but they didn't do them at all. So yeah, that's again sort of the political implications and our self-governance implications if we can't really trust what we see and hear. So there was a lot that was directly pulled from the politics of the year. I only the pandemic part of it was only a sort of a jumping off point to get to this planet. The planet itself in the future doesn't have a pandemic, but certainly the beginning, the first episode of the disappearing, she's quarantined, she's having a Zoom call with her therapist, she's working from the couch and eating from the couch, and just kind of that's the jumping off point. That's our sort of shared familiar world, unfortunately, that we can sort of connect with before going on this crazy adventure.
Yeah. I have one last question. What was your favourite song in the disappearing, and why?
Sure. Okay, well, I'll tell you my least favorite song was the song I sang. I just, I haven't been the best singer, and it's something I'm actually trying to get better at. But I challenged myself. Okay, I'm going to sing a song, and it's going to be the first song, and it's funny. It's a funny thing the way some of these accidental decisions I made, where the first episode is what everyone's going to hear first, and it has me singing on it. If I spent any more time thinking about it, I would have had the best singer sing the first episode song, and sort of set it up so that the first episode is really hooks people. I think it does a pretty good job as it is, but my favorite song I think is song 5, the song in episode 5. It has a dear friend of mine that I've known since middle school. We've known each other 20 plus years. He's a great singer and musician in New York. He sings on it. I have my friend play sitar on it. I turned it into a music video. So if you search on YouTube for Spacetime Diaries, you can find the music video for it.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I sort of stumbled across that after I learned we were doing an interview with you, and I sort of stumbled across it.
Yeah, so it's a song. The episode is you follow the adventure party kind of traveling through this hyper futuristic colony by the Silicon Valley culture, and they're just observing sort of all the fantastical things in this world. But the song is being sung by one of the members of the hippie culture. So they are sort of overwhelmed with wonder at the things that are possible in this colony, but they also are aware of the dangers of a lifestyle where you do sort of, have this unmitigated sort of chase for creature comfort, for the sake of the ecology that you live in. So I think this. I think the song is probably the best written and executed.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the whole podcast sounds utterly stupendous. I've only listened to a few bits and bobs here and there since I learned we were doing this interview. But now, literally everything you've said has made me more and more inclined.
Oh yeah, good.
Like it's my podcast player has got this sort of play later thing, and all the episodes are queued up, and now I need to shuffle them all up to the top because it sounds so up my street.
Oh, please do.
Every single one of these, every single sort of thing you keep mentioning, I keep thinking if there was a Star Trek episode about that, I would love that. And you've put all of these things together in this wonderful piece. I'm really
cool.
excited.
Yeah, I hope people listen to it like they would watch a movie. Like I feel like the way I consume podcasts is I have it on while I'm cooking or cleaning the kitchen or working or something. Yeah. But I really kind of hope that people, because there's a lot. It's very sonically immersive, and it's been mixed very well by a professional. So you're in good hands to put it on nice speakers and sort of give it your undivided attention. I worked really hard so that it didn't sag at any point. So the pacing, there was enough sort of activity and action and sort of suspense to kind of keep you going. I'd love for you to hear the whole thing, and I'd love to hear what you think.
I have listened to it, and it's like you have a very unique way of like being able to get the world building in without it like coming across as ancient times, blah blah. The songs really help with that. It sort of conveys the emotions that both these cultures are feeling. It's really well done.
Oh, thank you. I was really deliberate. Like the show Don't Tell. I hate. There's in so much lazy, especially in science fiction, so much lazy writing. There's like a scene in the first 10 minutes where it's just somebody explaining everything, and it's just like, oh, come on, like you could do better.
Yeah.
Even worse is when a sci-fi something sort of opens and there's literally a wall of
Speaking of Star Wars,
reading to you and you're going, oh my god. Yeah. Well, this has been an absolutely brilliant interview, but I think we're just about hitting the end of our time now. But thank you very much for coming to speak with us, Ghan. It's been absolutely an utter pleasure speaking with you.
It's been so great chatting with you two. And thanks for inviting me to the Discord. I'll keep poking around here.
Definitely.
Fantastic. Yeah, we it's half a dozen of us being a bit confusing and weird, but you are more than welcome to pop in.
Wonderful. All right, thank you.
Where can people find Spacetime Diaries before we go?
Yeah, you can search Spacetime Diaries in Spotify or Google or Apple Podcasts or just on in Google. I have a website, spacetimediaries.com. The podcast is streaming all over, everywhere podcasts are, and check out that YouTube also, that music video. It's a great sort of like I created it so that people would get excited to sit down for 75 minutes and listen to something.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, it sounds great. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Ghan. We're going to wrap up now and just say thank you very much for chatting with us, and thank you very much to anybody that's been listening to our podcast. It's always a pleasure to speak with such skilled content creators as yourself.
Oh, thank you. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, cheers.